Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Penn Vicarage on this beautiful and sunny Thursday morning. Lovely to see you. Hope you're having a good week. Hope you're well and cheerful. And thank you for joining us as we continue our way through the book of the prophet Isaiah. And today we are in chapter 13. Starts kind of a new section. Chapters 1 to 12 are a sort of big section, you might say. And chapters 13 to 24 are kind of the next big section. And today we're going to do chapter 13. And if you happen to be a Babylonian, put your heart out at this point. Isaiah and chapter 13. The oracle concerning Babylon that Isaiah son of Amos saw. On a bare hill raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, I have summoned my warriors, my proudly exulting ones, to execute my anger. Listen, a tumult on the mountain as of a great multitude. Listen, an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. The Lord of hosts is mustering an army for battle. They will come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens, the Lord and the weapons of his indignation, to destroy the whole earth. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt, and they will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them. They will be like in anguish, like a woman in labour. They will look aghast at one another. Their faces will be aflame. See, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the earth a desolation and to destroy its sinners from it. From the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, for the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pride of the arrogant, and lay low the insolence of tyrants. I will make mortals more rare than fine gold, and humans than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place, at the wrath of the Lord of hosts, on the day of his fierce anger. Like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep with no one to gather them, all will turn to their own people, and all will flee to their own lands. Whoever is found will be thrust through, whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered and their wives ravished. See, I'm stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. Their bows will slaughter the young men. They will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pride of the Chaldeans, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. Arabs will not pitch their tents there. Shepherds will not make their flocks lie down there, but wild animals will lie down there, and its houses will be full of howling creatures. There ostriches will live. There goat demons will dance. Hyenas will cry in its towers, and jackals in the pleasant places. Its time is close at hand, and its days will not be prolonged. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. It's like I said, you happen to be Babylonian, put your heart out on. Right, so what's going on here? Well, as I say, essentially, chapters 1 to 12 are really about Judah and the fact they've gone astray, and that God was going to use a power called the Assyrians to purify them. And all happened around about the year that King Uzziah died and that sort of area. And so it was all about the Judah, where they'd gone wrong, and the threat from the major power at the time, which was from Assyria, which is kind of northern Iraq. So you have Judah, where it's gone wrong, and you have God using the superpower Assyria to kind of purify them, and Isaiah's involvement in that. That's essential. So the focus is on Judah and the Assyrian threat and where God is in it and everything. Chapters 13 to 24 are about the other nations around, and he goes on to mention about 10 other nations which are around. And in chapter 13 and the first part of chapter 14, he talks about Babylon. Now, if I may, I'd like to give you a bit of a note about Babylon, because it comes up quite a lot, just to kind of put it all in context. In the time of Isaiah, kind of 720, it's been sort of 700 and 720 BC, the major threat at the time was Assyria. But they came and they conquered Syria, and they conquered Samaria and various other places, and they got within a mile of Jerusalem. They got to a place called Nob before being pushed back. Now, eventually, Assyria became gradually their power started to wane, but in the background was the rising stars at the time were the Babylonians. And eventually, in about 650 BC, Nineveh, which is the capital of Assyria, was trashed by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians got bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, under a brilliant king by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, who you may have heard of, they started coming in, and the Babylonians got bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually they came through, and they went beyond Jerusalem as well. And what they did essentially was that they took away the sort of cream of the Judean people like Daniel, the book of Daniel and so on, and Daniel was taken back to Babylon. That's why he was there under Nebuchadnezzar, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually what happens is the king called Jehoiakim, who was king of Judah at the time, became like a vassal king for the Babylonians when he was for a while. And then he rebelled and he was eventually taken away. So, I beg your pardon, he died and and Nebuchadnezzar went in. But before he arrived, Jehoiakim died. And then his son Jehoiakim took over. And he became king for a while, and eventually there was a siege, and he died, and he was taken over then by his son Zedekiah, and Zedekiah also rebelled and tried to form an alliance with Egypt, and eventually King Nebuchadnezzar got sick of it all basically, and took the whole lot away into exile. And in 587 BC, Judah was taken into ignominious exile into Babylon, and it was Judah's lowest point, you might say. If you want to hear what it felt like, read Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered you, O Zion, and so on. So eventually, in 587 BC, eventually King Nebuchadnezzar had enough. He just took the whole lot into exile, took them away, and it got really, really bad. Now, the strange thing about this, and by the way, a few years later, eventually, of course, the Babylonians, their power waned as well, and they were taken over by the Medes and Persians. But they come even later after that. The strange thing about this, really, is it basically happened, the exile and so on, and the rise of Nebuchadnezzar and so on, happened about 100 years after Isaiah. And some people have argued that maybe this wasn't written by Isaiah, but 100 years later. But actually, in the beginning of chapter 30, it says quite clearly that it was Isaiah. The oracle concerning Babylon that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw. So that clearly cannot be the case. Obviously, it may just be that Isaiah was a clever judge of international affairs, and maybe Isaiah saw it coming. Or it could be that God is sovereign and that God told Isaiah because God knew what was going to come. But one way or another, Isaiah was able to see in chapter 13 the rise of the power of the Babylonians and how proud they'd be, and how eventually they get a cropper as well. But there are, I think, a couple of things that we need to say which are kind of really important to us. Firstly, that God is sovereign of everything, that God is in charge. And I think we need to hear this again and again and again from the book of Isaiah. It comes loud and clear that we need to know that God is sovereign. And that today, when we look around the world around us, and it can seem difficult, we've got China and Russia and all the other, America and all the sort of powers around and so on. And they can get very big and they can feel very powerful and they can look and they can feel very threatening. But at the end of the day, my friends, God is in charge, that God is sovereign and that God knows what he's doing. And that these superpowers that must have seemed very big at the time, at the end of the day, they were putty in God's hands. And we need to know, and we need to be reminded actually, that God is sovereign of all things. But the other thing which is intriguing about Babylon is because Babylon, of course, is code for lots of other things, usually the code for active pride and rebellion against God. So you see it, for example, in the Tower of Babel, which is in Genesis and chapter 11, from which we get the word Babylon, Babylon, you can see there, which is where humanity got prouder and prouder and prouder and started to think that they could rule the world and so on. And of course, they were descended into Babel eventually, and that God sent them, and that's when different languages started, so they confused their speech and so on. So you can see in Genesis chapter 11, humanity liking to think it's terribly proud and terribly clever and so on. And of course, you get the whore of Babylon in chapter 18 of the book of Revelation, that great proud Babylon, and you see falls in dramatic fashion in Genesis, in Revelation and chapter 18. Read it at your leisure. So Babylon is code not just for the place of Babylon in the time of Isaiah and 100 years later. Babylon is also code for human pride, human arrogance, a human defiance that says, oh, we're clever, aren't we? And we don't need God. And Babylon is code for that, both at the beginning of creation in Genesis, at the end of the word in Revelation, and all through history as well. And we need to remember that God is sovereign. And to think that we are terribly clever and to think that we don't need God is the way of Babylon. It didn't go well in Genesis. It doesn't go well in Isaiah 13. And it certainly doesn't go well in Revelation chapter 18. We need to remember, my friends, as always, that God is sovereign, that we need God, that the pillars of the earth belong to the Lord. The Lord holds everything up. He is in charge. He's sovereign. And we need to make sure that our hope is in him. That way there is hope. And in him there's redemption and hope and peace. Babylon can be proud if it wants to. But we, my friends, we must keep our dependence, our hope, and our trust in God and in God alone. Friends, hope that makes sense. How